Hi, I'm Terrell Turner, the host of the Food and the Finance Show. And as we always talk, being in the restaurant business is more than just about the food and the restaurant. It's a lot of it, and probably more than you think, is about the business side of it. And so I'm glad to bring on Matt Rajput because he has a ton of experience in the restaurant industry, and we're going to have a great conversation. So stay tuned.
Welcome to another great episode of the Food and Finance Show, where we talk about two things we know you love: great food and money. So stay tuned because we got a great show coming your way.
So without further ado, let me bring on my awesome guest. Matt, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Sorrel. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Now, Matt, you and I were talking before, we hit the record button of, when people think about the restaurant business, a lot of times they don't think about the business side restaurant. So before we jump into that, I want to know, what's your background and kind of how did you find your way into the restaurant business?
Yeah, definitely. So I started my career in public accounting, working in tech, mostly small software as a service companies, where the end game wasn't necessarily to create a revolutionary product, but rather to create some kind of to solve an ancillary problem, garner enough market share, and then get acquired. So that aspect of my career really helped me understand the importance of being properly capitalized. And I got to work through all the intricacies of dozens of complex debt and equity structures. Then the recession hit, and after the recession, there was this whole sea change of consumer demand in the restaurant industry, and fast casual took off as, diners were a little more discerning with not only their dollars, but also with their time, because there was nobody wanted to spend an hour and a half sitting at lunch when you could go through the Chipotle line and do a quick 20 minutes, get a really good quality meal, and then go back to work. That's when we saw these restaurant companies coming out that were trying to mirror that same hockey stick growth that had previously been associated with the tech industry. And that growth was fueled through like a lot of big private equity investments and non-traditional finance arrangements. And I just saw a great opportunity to utilize my skill set while just moving to a much more hospitable industry. And, after making that switch, I had the ability to work with some great companies like Cava and Pizza and Jose Andres' Think Food Group, the Silver Diner, and the Green Turtle.
Gotcha. Nice. I mean, that's quite the journey. I mean, I guess when you think back to what you were doing with the tech companies, I guess, did you even envision that, hey, the food industry or restaurants would even be a potential path for you?
No, but it was always something that I knew. I hated going home and telling my mom or telling my friends, like, what are you doing at work? And I'm like, oh, I work for this, I've got a client that does a thing on the internet that it doesn't matter. None of it matters. It's dumb. Don't worry about it. I always wanted to be able to like point to something and say, hey, I work there, or this is something that I do. And so that was always having something tangible and physical that you could point to and say, I helped create that, was always in the cards for me.
Gotcha. No, I can so relate to that because I mean, that was one of the joys that I got about when I left public accounting and then I went to work for pretty much industrial manufacturing companies, to where I could point to the end product of what we made. So like when someone asked me like, oh, what do you do? There was some reference point you can give them. It just makes the conversation flow a lot better.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Having a tangible, something you can credit yourself with is nice, as opposed to, hey, there's this company that does nothing on the internet.
Gotcha. Awesome. So now, as you kind of made your way into, the I guess you say the restaurant business, did you find that you were running into people who had been in the restaurant business, or did you find other people like yourself who were moving from other industries into the restaurant business?
Yes and no. I think there was this obvious culture of restaurant people that they're like, I was born a restaurant person. I'm going to always be a restaurant person. And there was like that group of individuals. And then when that fast casual boom really happened, there was all this new blood that came into the market that was really looking to change the way the business was designed. And it became a lot less, at least from an accounting perspective, right? It became a lot less of, oh, my cousin does my books, or my brother-in-law does my books. And we actually have a really very qualified CPA who's our, VP of finance or our CFO, and he knows how to, or she knows how to raise a bunch of money, and we're gonna shoot to the moon.
Gotcha. Nice. I love it. I love it. I mean, because that's one of those things that I wondered myself as I started, serving more restaurants. It's just how many of them grasp, just as you said, that need to be properly capitalized. Now, as you started working with different business in the restaurant industry, did you find that many of them already, I guess, were prepared to have that type of discussion? Or was it kind of a learning process for the ones you were running into?
Yeah. A lot of people, everyone I talk to, when you open your first restaurant, you think you need X dollars, and you need, it's not always 2X, but it's definitely X plus some number dollars. And there's always things that hit. If any restaurant ever opened on time, I would be shocked to go to that restaurant. There's always going to be delays, and you're always going to need more money and more time. And you never want to open something and then not have any cash or any reserves to help back it up and support it and build a following. So you always want to have a little bit of extra money, a little bit of extra cushion in the bank, and give yourself a little bit more runway, because that's how you're going to be successful. Is if you put all that effort into building something, you want to put all the effort into, once it's open, making sure it's as successful as possible.
Gotcha. Now, I guess as you started to kind of like move and I guess you say graduate through different aspects of the restaurant business, were there any things about, running a restaurant that kind of popped out to you like, oh, I didn't realize this was happening, or, hey, I didn't expect to run into like, these subject matters or these topics?
Yeah. As I left the tech, the tech industry to hopefully make my life a little bit easier. Cause I was like, oh, restaurants, it's going to be easy, right? You sell food and people pay you. There's no revenue recognition issues here. It's, you take out bank debt and build a restaurant and then you pay it back. It's easy. But little did I know that, there was all kinds of, these private equity transactions that were happening in, the last 10, 15 years are just as complex, if not more so, than those ones in the tech industry. And it's wild to see that kind of stuff, especially as the IPO market really kind of froze up, and restaurant companies, the goal was stopped being to go public and to just get that private equity infusion and then to build out from there. And if it's, one infusion, or you go back and get a second round or a third round or however many you need, that was really the end goal. And it got more and more complex as time went on.
Mm-hmm. And I wonder if that part of me wonders if that created some kind of friction because when you think about the old school way of thinking about the restaurant business, a lot of people, they bought it to hold it, to run it, and they were just going to get their profits from just, the residual profits from running the operation, to where now when you bring in, private equity funding to where they're looking at valuations and multiples, like how much do you think that kind of, clash with the people who were legacy restaurant, I guess you say legacy restaurant people?
Yeah, absolutely. And not just that mentality, but also the technology that came along with it. Was now there's all these companies that, from AP automation to your loyalty programs to just the complexities of a POS system. We went from the cash register where you were like, it rang, it made the ding, and then you took the cash and made change. You had to do that math, in your head. It got so much more involved from a technology standpoint that it really became unfair to compete. And if you didn't keep up with the waves, you got drowned in the Undertale, really.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. And that's definitely something, with the technology, it brings on board different things to think about. Like I was talking with, one restaurant, they were trying to figure out like why they weren't making as much money as they were making before. And we started looking at their, the systems they were using to, for their sales. And it's just like, well, what are your merchant fees? And, to them, it was just like, well, what is that? I'm like, that's a very big factor that, like I said, you didn't have to think about when people were coming in and you were just ringing it up right at the register.
Right. Yeah. And, if you're not amenable to those types of changes, you're not gonna be able to compete in the market. Now, maybe you're one restaurant and you've got a cult following and people are going to come to your restaurant regardless. That's great. But if you're looking to grow and expand, you've got to be on the cutting edge of some of these things. Now, you don't have to invest in every brand of technology. You don't need everything. You don't need every bell and whistle that's, on the shelf, but you definitely need some of it. And you need to be able to invest in certain things that are going to help you go forward.
Gotcha. I mean, and speaking, of that technology, there's so much coming out. I mean, I would say from your experience, how many, I guess you say, new technology tools are you guys kind of adding? Have you seen companies having to add or implement on a monthly basis, or do they usually like, hey, you get a technology and you can usually use that for, let's say, a year before you got to evolve to the next thing? Or is it just constantly changing?
Yeah, it's constantly changing, and there's so much overlap between things. So, when you use a system like QuickBooks, you could upgrade to a system like Restaurant 365, and it will do 10 times the things that you were doing in QuickBooks. But if you use QuickBooks, then you could also go out and get a handful of, an AP automation tool or, an inventory management tool. You can get these other things to supplement, and then you can have 3 or 4 different technologies to ultimately do what one would do. And whether you're paying less or more, really getting the value out of them, it depends. But ultimately, every company I've seen, you invest in the technology, and then if you use maybe 25% of the functionality of it, that would be a high percentage. There's so much that all these things do that barely anybody utilizes them to their fullest extent. And if you do, then you could really get some great insight into the operations of your business and get some real telling metrics out of it and, areas to improve on.
Oh, I think that's a really good point, because I often wonder at times with the rate of change in the technology offerings and the features that come out is like, what percent of the tech tools that people have are they actually using? And how much of it, because especially as you start to scale your business, I always wonder like how much of your tech spend is an overlap as you start to scale, because hey, this department over here got this tool, but this department over here didn't know that feature exists. And I guess, do you guys run into that as you've seen, yourself move through different organizations?
I try not to. We try to spend smart, and really at Hawkers, it's been great because we've got a very knowledgeable management team, and that are very much behind every initiative that we put forth, and they've been incredibly helpful. But when we make investments, we try to use every last drop of what they're providing to us.
Gotcha. Awesome. Now, so you mentioned Hawkers. Can you tell us a little bit about, what is Hawkers? That way the listeners can understand what Hawkers is.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, Hawkers is a high energy, full service restaurant concept. We're here to showcase the authentic flavors of Asia, specifically those of various hawker stands that you might find in the night market. Only we save you the jet lag from an 18-hour flight. So we've got 6 in Florida, 2 in North Carolina, 1 in Charlotte, 1 in Chapel Hill, 1 in Nashville, 1 in Atlanta, and 1 right outside of DC in Bethesda. We're opening Dallas is number 12 coming later this year.
Nice. It's something unique about always being able to get authentic flavors. Because like as you kind of travel around, there's so many different restaurant concepts that come up, but just when you have that chance to get something that's authentic, that's amazing. So I guess, what was your experience like when you first started tasting the food?
Yeah, look, it's I'm not a foodie, like I'm not a critic by any means, but the food's great. but everybody's going to tell you their food's great. Nobody's putting out crappy food. I think the biggest thing that drew me to Hawkers was that the company as a whole really understood its identity. It's that Game of Thrones quote that I'm going to butcher. Know who you are, make it your armor, and it can never be used against you. That's what Hawkers is unapologetic about. The idea of serving authentic food, having incredibly warm and welcoming hospitality, and creating an energetic, upbeat vibe. And it doesn't matter if you're coming in for a birthday party, an anniversary, or just Tuesday night at the bar. We want you to come in, have a full sensory experience. And that clear understanding of identity was that was the most critical step to what I wanted to, an organization that I wanted to be part of, because that's the first step to future growth. Because you can't take a step if you're wobbling. So we're on incredibly firm ground because we know who we are.
Nice. I love it. I love it. I love it. And I guess, speaking of just, like I said, just being able to know who you are, I do think it's a very, very, very impactful thing to see that. I mean, where you find different businesses that know who they are and they really stand on that. So, speaking of that, as you kind of look through, your career and moving through different positions, I mean, you started off as an accounting and a finance professional. Did you find yourself starting to adapt to, feel like more than just, hey, an accountant as you kind of move through the different roles? Or did you find like your own professional identity adjust some?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I definitely had to make that transition. So I went from accountant to consultant to I don't know what I'm really doing. How am I a consultant? So I went out and got myself a job as, I was a food runner and a host at a Michelin star restaurant in DC. And I was like, I gotta be able to experience this so that I can't tell somebody how to run their business if I've never done it before. I've very much always believed in that even if you do it for one day, you should do it to get your hands dirty and see what it's like. And then you can give instruction. So I did that for 5 years just to make sure I was getting experience and really understanding what the business was like and the pressures and all the things that happen. And so I definitely felt that change from accountant to to restaurant person. And now I feel like I've got enough restaurant blood in me that I can be a restaurant person.
Nice. I love it. I love it. Well, before we wrap up, one question I always like to ask every guest that comes on is, when you think about your experiences and you think about where you've been and, where you are now, what's 2 pieces of advice that you would give to other businesses within the hospitality industry?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've listened to all your podcasts. They're all great. I had to think really hard about my answers to these questions. So number 1, I learned from my mentor, Stephanie O'Rourke. You don't pay bills with margin. So what that means is while there's millions of metrics and key performance indicators out there that you can look at, you can work to improve all of them. You got to keep your eye on the ball. So you might be hyper-focused on getting your labor costs below 30% or your prime costs below 60% or whatever. But on the first of the month, you pay your rent with dollars, not percentage points. So don't lose focus on the ultimate goal of putting more cash into your bank account. And then number 2 was you can't underestimate the importance of a full set of financial statements. This is the ultimate accounting guide point. But if you're managing your finances from a bank statement, you're not doing it correctly. If you're looking at a P&L, that's better, but really having a full grasp on a balance sheet and a P&L is incredibly important to understand where the cash has been spent, where the business is going, how you're operating. And that's why it's so important to have someone like yourself involved with companies, especially in their formative years, to make sure that financial records are kept neat and orderly, and that that information can help inform strategic business decisions going forward.
Absolutely. I totally love it. So I want to say, Matt, thank you so much for coming on, the show, sharing your experience and all the amazing insights and the wisdom that you share, because I am absolutely certain that, restaurant owners, those that are in the restaurant businesses, that they'll get a ton of value from this. So definitely thanks for coming on, Matt.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Absolutely.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode. If you like what you heard, don't be selfish. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and then share this with a friend, because you know a business owner that could definitely use this insight. So be sure to hit that subscribe button, share it with a friend, and turn on the notification bell so you get all the updates when we release a new episode.